Laid down at the Admiralty shipyard in St. Petersburg in June 1909, Petropavlovsk was commissioned in January 1914 as one of 4 Gangut-class dreadnoughts, Russia's first capital ships designed to international standards rather than domestic compromise. Displacement: 23,360 tons standard. Armament: 12 305mm/52 caliber guns in 4 triple turrets arranged in a linear superfiring configuration. Speed: 23 knots. The 225mm waterline armor belt was substantial by Russian precedent, insufficient against contemporary German dreadnought gunnery at battle ranges. The ship's crew voted to support the Kronstadt sailor revolt in March 1921, placing the vessel in direct political opposition to the Bolshevik government she nominally served. Renamed Marat that same year, she underwent modest upgrades through the 1920s, improved fire control directors, revised anti-aircraft mounts, reconfigured secondary batteries. No fundamental structural modernization followed. On September 23, 1941, Ju-88 aircraft from Kampfgeschwader 1 struck the vessel in Kronstadt harbour. A single 1,000-kilogram bomb penetrated the forward magazine. The bow section forward of Turret 2 disintegrated in the detonation. 326 men died instantly. The hull settled to the harbour bottom in 11 meters of water. Soviet engineers subsequently floated and braced the stern section against the quay, returning the aft 2 turrets to use as fixed shore batteries, a role they maintained through 1944. The remains were struck from the Naval Register in 1953. Gangut was the nameship of the class, laid down at the Baltic Works in June 1909 and commissioned November 1914. Technical specifications matched her sisters: 23,360 tons standard displacement, 12 305mm guns, a maximum speed recorded at 23.5 knots on builders' trials. The ship served through the First World War primarily as a fleet-in-being force in the Gulf of Finland, deterring German naval incursions rather than engaging in direct action. Renamed Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya in 1925, this vessel received the most comprehensive modernization of any Gangut-class ship during the interwar years. Between 1931 and 1934, reconstruction at Kronstadt replaced the original lattice masts with tripods, added external torpedo protection bulges that increased beam by 4.5 meters, rebuilt the superstructure entirely, and upgraded the bar and Stroud fire control system with Soviet-designed optics. Anti-aircraft armament grew progressively through the late 1930s, eventually comprising 6 76mm guns and 16 37mm automatic cannons. Post-reconstruction full load displacement reached 26,170 tons. During the siege of Leningrad, the ship served as a heavy fire support platform from Kronstadt, engaging German artillery positions with counter-battery fire coordinated through forward observers on the mainland perimeter. She absorbed 2 bomb hits in 1941 without catastrophic damage. A post-war reclassification in 1954 redesignated her a training ship. Final decommissioning came in 1956. Scrapping was completed by 1959. Sevastopol was laid down at the Baltic Works in June 1909 and commissioned November 1914. She was transferred to the Black Sea Fleet in 1929 following an 8-month transit through the Mediterranean, a voyage completed without mechanical incident, noted by Western naval observers who had expected breakdown before Gibraltar. In the Black Sea, she was renamed Parizhskaya Kommuna. The renaming had its own political irony. The original Paris Commune had lasted 72 days before military suppression. Soviet naval administrators apparently found the parallel acceptable. The vessel underwent partial modernization between 1938 and 1939 at Sevastopol Naval Shipyard. Work addressed secondary battery arrangement, anti-aircraft installations, and the direct-to-fire control system, though the hull's fundamental 1914 profile was unchanged. Full load displacement following modifications reached approximately 26,600 tons. The rebuilt superstructure incorporated the tripod mast configuration standard across the modernized Gangut-class. When German forces reached the Crimean Peninsula in autumn 1941, Parizhskaya Kommuna relocated to Poti on the eastern Black Sea coast, operating from this reduced-risk anchorage for the war's duration. She conducted shore bombardment missions against Axis positions in Crimea, including a fire support role during the Soviet amphibious landing at Feodosia in January 1942. The ship survived the war without catastrophic structural damage. Post-war redesignation in 1943 restored her original name Sevastopol. She was stricken in 1956, scrapped by 1957. Poltava was the fourth and final Gangut-class dreadnought, commissioned December 17, 1914 from the Admiralty shipyard. Her career through the First World War paralleled those of her sisters. Deterrence operations in the Gulf of Finland, intermittent fleet exercises, and the systematic material attrition of a navy that was decaying faster than it could be maintained. On November 24, 1919, a catastrophic fire broke out in her boiler compartments at Petrograd. The cause was almost certainly negligent maintenance during the period of maximum institutional collapse following the Civil War. The interior of the ship was destroyed. The Soviet Navy conducted damage assessments in 1923 and again in 1926. Both concluded that restoration was technically feasible, but costly. Plans were drafted in 1927 to rebuild the vessel with modernized armor, a new propulsion plant, and updated armament. The ship was renamed Frunze in 1926. Reconstruction began at the Baltic Works, but stalled repeatedly under material shortages and competing budget priorities through the early 1930s. Work was formally suspended in 1935. The decision was economically rational. The cost of completing Frunze now exceeded her projected operational value. The partially reconstructed hull was redesignated as a source of spare components for Oktyabrskaya Revolutsia's ongoing modernization. Metal stripped from the hull was used directly in her sister ship's reconstruction. Frunze was broken up beginning in 1949. She never fired a gun in Soviet service. Her only contribution was disassembly. Imperatrica Ekaterina Velikaya was the second Imperatrica Maria-class dreadnought, commissioned October 18, 1915, at Nikolaev for service with the Black Sea Fleet. Displacement, 24,000 tons. Armament, 12 305mm/52 caliber guns in 4 triple turrets, the same arrangement as the Gangut-class but on a heavier, better protected hull. Maximum belt armor reached 262mm. The vessel was intended to provide firepower superiority over the Ottoman Navy's principal asset, the German-supplied battlecruiser Yavuz Sultan Selim, formerly the Goeben. The strategic rationale was coherent. The ship was effective. She operated against Turkish coastal targets and escorted mine-laying operations through 1916 and 1917. Following the February Revolution, she was renamed Svobodnaya Rossiya. The October Revolution placed her in an ambiguous command structure as competing political factions contested control of the Black Sea Fleet. By spring 1918, the terms of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk threatened German seizure of all Black Sea naval assets. On June 18, 1918, the destroyer Kerch fired 2 torpedoes into Svobodnaya Rossiya on direct orders from the Revolutionary Naval Council, preferring destruction to German capture. She capsized outside Novorossiysk harbour. The vessel had been in nominal Soviet service for fewer than 8 months. The decision to scuttle was contested within the fleet. Multiple senior officers opposed destruction on grounds that the political situation might yet be reversed. It was not. The Black Sea Fleet's deliberate self-destruction in 1918 left the Soviet Navy without a southern capital ship capability for 22 years. Imperator Alexander III was the third Imperatrica Maria-class dreadnought, commissioned June 15, 1917, after the February Revolution but before the Bolshevik coup, making her the only Russian capital ship to enter service under the provisional government. She was also the only battleship of her class to survive the war undamaged, and the only one to avoid Soviet control entirely, through a combination of geography and political contingency. Following the Bolshevik seizure of power, the vessel joined White Russian forces under General Wrangel and was renamed General Alexeyev. During the final evacuation of Crimea in November 1920, she carried approximately 7,000 refugees and elements of Wrangel's dissolving army across the Black Sea to Constantinople. The strategic significance of this transit was total. It represented the permanent export of the White cause from Russian territory. The ship subsequently anchored at Bizerte, Tunisia, under French administrative custody. The French government maintained the vessel in storage as Russian émigré organizations debated competing claims to the fleet. France formally recognized the Soviet government in 1924, theoretically transferring legal ownership of the Bizerte squadron. No physical transfer followed. The Soviet Navy had no Black Sea fleet capable of accepting delivery, no funds to operate the ship, and no political mechanism for negotiating with the diaspora communities holding informal custody. General Alexeyev corroded at Bizerte until 1936, when she was sold to Italian breakers. Her guns were never fired after 1920. The Sovietsky-Soyuz class represented Stalin's ambition to build a blue water fleet capable of contesting Atlantic sea lanes. The Project 23 design was developed with technical assistance from the Italian firm Ansaldo and incorporated intelligence drawn from British capital ship programs. The final specification called for a 65,150-ton vessel carrying 9 406mm/50 caliber guns in 3 triple turrets. A bore diameter matching the Iowa-class, firing a heavier 1,105 kilogram shell at a lower muzzle velocity, optimized for plunging fire at long ranges. Armor protection was formidable on paper: a 375mm main belt, 495mm turret faces, and a 380mm conning tower. Design speed was 28 knots. Designed range reached 14,000 nautical miles at 14 knots. The program authorized 4 ships. Sovietsky-Soyuz was laid down at the Ordzhonikidze Baltic Works in Leningrad on July 15, 1938. By June 1941, the hull had achieved approximately 21% structural completion, roughly 9,600 tons of steel assembled on the slipway. The German invasion of June 22nd terminated the program immediately. Construction materials were redirected to fortification work. German forces occupied portions of the Baltic Works grounds during the siege of Leningrad, though the hull itself was not captured. Post-war assessments in 1945 and 1946 concluded that resuming construction was economically impractical and strategically obsolete. The hull was scrapped in 1949. Sovetskaya Ukraina was laid down at the Nikolaev shipyard on the Black Sea on October 31, 1938, the second Project 23 hull, and the program's most complete physical manifestation at the moment the war arrived. By June 1941, her hull had achieved approximately 18% structural completion, representing roughly 31,000 tons of assembled steel on the slipway. Specifications were identical to the lead ship: 65,150 tons full load, 9 406mm guns, 28 knot design speed, 375mm belt armor. German forces reached Nikolaev on August 16, 1941. Soviet workers and engineers evacuated with technical documentation, portable tooling, and as much salvageable material as the available time permitted. The hull itself could not be moved. German naval engineers subsequently inspected the vessel in detail. Their assessment, forwarded to the Oberkommando der Marine, concluded that the Soviets had been constructing a genuinely formidable ship, but that industrial execution showed significant gaps between design ambition and fabrication quality. Hull plating tolerances were inconsistent, and several structural joints showed evidence of improvised remediation. Germany had no operational use for an incomplete Soviet battleship hull. The vessel sat at Nikolaev through the occupation, stripped progressively of useful material. When Soviet forces retook the city in March 1944, the stripped hull was found intact. Post-war investigations briefly assessed completion feasibility. The estimate was prohibitive. Completing the vessel would cost more than constructing a new ship from the keel up. The hull was broken up between 1947 and 1949. Sovetskaya Rossiya was laid down at the Molotov shipyard in Severodvinsk on July 22, 1939. The third Project 23 hull, and the only one constructed at a northern yard. The choice of Severodvinsk reflected Soviet strategic planning that envisioned these ships operating across multiple fleet theaters: a Baltic ship, a Black Sea ship, and a Northern Fleet ship. The fourth hull would provide a Pacific-capable reserve. In theory, no single theater adversary could simultaneously threaten all vessels. Construction progressed more slowly than at Nikolaev or Leningrad. The Severodvinsk yard lacked the heavy lifting equipment and experienced workforce of the major southern facilities. Project 23 demanded precision metalwork and complex armor plate installations that strained Soviet industrial capacity even at optimally equipped yards. At Severodvinsk, the difficulties were compounded by climate, supply chain distance, and the yard's relative inexperience with capital ship construction. By the time war arrived in June 1941, Sovetskaya Rossiya had achieved approximately 5% structural completion. The program was suspended immediately, and the formal cancellation order, which had actually been issued in 1940 before significant work commenced, was rendered academic by events. Unlike the Leningrad and Nikolaev hulls, this vessel posed no capture risk, given the Northern Front's geographic configuration. The slipway materials were redirected to convoy escort vessel production. The slipway was cleared by late 1941. No German or Allied officer ever inspected what remained. Sovetskaya Byelorussiya was the fourth and final Project 23 hull laid down at the Molotov shipyard in Severodvinsk on July 22, 1940, exactly 1 year after Sovetskaya Rossiya on the same slipway. The symbolic precision of the laying down ceremony masked fundamental problems with the entire program that Soviet planners had known about for months, but had not formally acknowledged in public. By 1940, Soviet naval intelligence had received detailed reporting on German capital ship construction, including the Bismarck-class, and preliminary specifications for the cancelled H-class battleships. They had also absorbed the lessons of the Winter War against Finland, which demonstrated that Soviet industrial planning had systematically overestimated production capacity and underestimated the complexity of advanced weapon systems requiring precision manufacturing tolerances beyond routine Soviet industrial practice. Sovetskaya Byelorussiya was cancelled before meaningful structural work commenced. Official records indicate less than 1% completion was achieved before the work stoppage. The slipway was cleared for submarine construction, which represented a more achievable and operationally relevant priority in the 1940 strategic environment. The 4 Project 23 ships collectively consumed approximately 240,000 tons of high-grade armor steel and tens of millions of rubles during their abortive construction phases. Every ton of that steel would have been more productively applied elsewhere. The program's termination was strategically correct. Its initiation, given the existing industrial capacity constraints, was not. Project 69 was the Soviet Union's battlecruiser program, a ship type that had effectively died in other navies after Jutland demonstrated the consequences of sacrificing armor for speed, but which was resurrected by Stalin's personal preference for large, fast, heavily armed surface combatants. The Kronstadt-class design called for a 35,240-ton ship carrying 9 305mm/54 caliber guns in 3 triple turrets, a 230mm main armor belt, and a designed speed of 32 knots. The armament selection was a significant operational compromise. Stalin had originally wanted 380mm guns, but Soviet industry could not produce them on the required schedule. Negotiations with Germany in 1939 and early 1940 explored acquiring the 380mm triple turrets being manufactured for German capital ships, never completed. Germany declined. The 305mm caliber was then adopted as the achievable alternative, adequate against contemporary cruisers, inadequate against the battleships these vessels were conceptually intended to intercept. Kronstadt was laid down at the Ordzhonikidze Baltic Works in Leningrad on November 30th, 1939. By June 1941, the hull had reached approximately 12% completion. The German invasion suspended all construction immediately. Unlike the Project 23 hulls, Kronstadt's partially assembled structure was progressively demolished during the siege of Leningrad to recover steel for city fortifications. Post-war analysis concluded the basic design was fatally compromised. Insufficient armor made the vessel vulnerable to the very dreadnoughts it was supposed to run down, while the medium-caliber guns could not reliably defeat them at any range. The The second Project 69 hull was also named Sevastopol, a name already carried by one of the surviving Gangut-class dreadnoughts, indicating either administrative carelessness or deliberate disregard for organizational clarity in Soviet naval nomenclature. This vessel was laid down at shipyard number 194 in Leningrad on November 5, 1939, 3 weeks before her sister Kronstadt. Specifications were identical across both hulls. Both Project 69 ships faced the same fundamental conceptual contradiction. The original design rationale demanded heavy guns capable of defeating contemporary foreign battleships in fleet engagements. The guns available from Soviet domestic production were insufficient for this role. The German offer of 380mm twin turrets, enough to partially rearm one ship with credible anti-battleship firepower, was pursued through diplomatic and commercial channels throughout 1939 and into early 1940. Germany made the offer contingent on Soviet trade concessions that the Soviet side was unwilling or unable to meet at acceptable terms. Negotiations collapsed entirely by late 1940, as German strategic preparations for Barbarossa superseded commercial diplomacy. This Sevastopol's construction mirrored Kronstadt's in both timeline and termination. By June 1941, the hull stood at approximately 11% completion. The German invasion suspended all major naval construction simultaneously. The structural material was absorbed into the Leningrad defensive perimeter over the following 3 years. A post-war feasibility study in 1946 included Project 69 among programs reviewed for possible resumption. The conclusion was negative. The formal cancellation had been issued in 1940. The siege completed what the order began. Project 24 was the Soviet Union's post-war attempt to finally build the battleships it had failed to complete before 1941. Design work began in 1945 at TSKB-17, drawing on captured German naval technical documentation, detailed intelligence regarding Iowa-class operations in the Pacific, and the accumulated wartime experience of Soviet naval planners who had watched their inherited dreadnoughts age into irrelevance in real combat. The design evolved through numerous iterations between 1945 and 1951. The most developed version, reviewed by the Council of Ministers in 1950, called for an 81,150-ton vessel carrying 9 457mm/55 caliber guns in 3 triple turrets, a caliber exceeding any weapon fitted to any operational battleship in history, including the Yamato's 460mm armament. Designed speed was 30 knots. Armor protection was specified to a level that would have made the vessel resistant to anything in the existing naval inventory. The estimated construction cost per hull was approximately 1.2 billion rubles at 1950 prices, roughly equivalent to building 40 submarines. Stalin personally reviewed the concept through 1951 and maintained interest in its development. The program was suspended following his death in March 1953. Nikita Khrushchev, who had observed American carrier aviation's decisive role in the Pacific War and Korean conflict, regarded the battleship concept as strategically obsolete in the missile age. Project 24 was cancelled within months of Khrushchev's consolidation of power. The design files were archived. No ship was ever named. Not 1 kilogram of steel was cut. Project 82, the Stalingrad class, was the only post-war Soviet capital ship program to proceed from design studies to actual steel cutting. Officially designated heavy cruisers to circumvent political resistance to the battleship label, these were in practice battlecruisers. 42,300-ton warships carrying 9 305mm/70 caliber guns in 3 triple turrets, a 180mm main armor belt, and a designed speed of 35 knots. The distinction between heavy cruiser and battlecruiser at these dimensions is primarily semantic. The armament represented a genuine advance over any previous Soviet naval gun. The 305mm/70 caliber weapon was a new post-war development, firing a 470-kilogram shell to a maximum range of 52 kilometers. A ballistic performance exceeding any gun of equivalent caliber in prior naval history. The fire control system incorporated post-war radar target designation, entirely absent from previous Soviet capital ship designs. The estimated complement was 1,700 men per vessel. Stalingrad was laid down at Nikolaev's shipyard, number 444, on December 31st, 1951. Construction progressed at credible pace through 1952. The hull had reached approximately 18% completion when Stalin died on March 5, 1953. Khrushchev's cancellation order was issued April 18, 1953. 44 days after Stalin's death, the hull was scrapped on the slipway in 1954. Stalingrad never fired a gun. She became the most visible evidence that Soviet capital ship ambitions were always, ultimately, one man's project. Moskva was the second Project 82 hull laid down at the Baltic Works in Leningrad on February 1, 1952. Her construction at the Baltic Works, the same facility that had built the Gangut-class 40 years earlier, and had partially assembled the Project 23 lead ship on an adjacent slipway, gave the program a geographical diversity that matched its strategic rationale. With Stalingrad building in the south and Moskva in the Baltic, no single air campaign could simultaneously eliminate both hulls before completion. The third ship, assigned to the Pacific, extended this logic east. Specifications were identical across all 3 Project 82 hulls: 42,300 tons standard displacement, 9 305mm/70 caliber guns, 35 knots design speed. The total program, if completed, would have committed approximately 5,100 naval personnel to a ship type that every other major navy had already concluded was obsolete in an era of carrier aviation and guided missiles. The Soviet Navy's own experience with the Gangut-class through 1944 provided direct evidence that battleships required extensive air cover to survive in contested waters. This evidence was available to the planners who approved Project 82. It was not acted upon. Moskva had reached approximately 12% structural completion when the cancellation order arrived in April 1953. The Baltic Works, with its greater capital ship experience, had maintained a faster construction pace than Nikolaev. The hull was broken up on the slipway in 1953 and 1954. The labour hours expended on all 3 Project 82 hulls were estimated at 6.2 million. The name Moskva was later assigned to a guided missile cruiser lost to Ukrainian Neptune missiles in the Black Sea on April 14, 2022. The connection is entirely nominal. The third Project 82 vessel, ordered for construction at shipyard number 199 in Komsomolsk-on-Amur in the Soviet Far East, was never formally named. It was designated for Pacific Fleet assignment and represented the program's eastern anchor, a facility built specifically to support major warship construction in a theatre completely isolated from European Russia by 9,000 kilometers of land. No photograph of the partial structure is known to survive in publicly accessible archives. Construction at Komsomolsk-on-Amur presented logistical obstacles that dwarfed those of the European yards. Armour plate for the hull was being manufactured at the Chelyabinsk steel complex and required a 6,000-kilometer overland transit via the Trans-Siberian Railway before installation. Specialized components, technical workers, and quality control personnel all required the same journey. Despite these constraints, preliminary structural work had begun on the slipway before the cancellation order reached the yard in spring 1953. Post-cancellation analysis suggested the Pacific hull was running 6 to 8 months behind its sister ships at Nikolaev and Leningrad, unsurprising given the supply chain conditions. Completion was estimated as being years further from achievement than the European hulls. The slipway was cleared in late 1953 and early 1954, the steel redirected to other naval construction. The ship had no name, no commander, and no operational future from the moment Khrushchev's decision was issued. Its cancellation was, of all three Project 82 hulls, the least consequential. It had barely begun to exist. December 25, 1967. Cold War tensions simmer as the Soviet Navy commissions a radical new breed of warship, the PKR Moskva. Displacing over 15,000 tons, this helicopter carrier cruiser represented the physical culmination of 3 decades of intense, bitter, institutional debate. Kremlin planners desperately clashed over whether the Soviet Union should field true aircraft carriers. The result? A massive compromise that arguably failed to master any of its intended roles. Visually, the Moskva was a split personality. Her forward half weaponized a conventional cruiser hull, bristling with twin SAN-3 Goblet surface-to-air missiles and a devastating Su-WN-1 anti-submarine rocket launcher. Yet, her aft half abruptly opened into a flush flight deck, packing 14 Kar-25 Hormone anti-submarine helicopters. Admiral Gorshkov demanded fleet carriers, but the Soviet Air Force and General Staff fiercely resisted, fearing a rival for aviation funding and questioning Western power projection strategies. When deployed to the Mediterranean, the Moskva hunted NATO submarines with real but severely limited tactical success. 14 helicopters simply could not secure an entire sea. This half measure ultimately proved that institutional deadlock creates half capabilities. The compromised hybrid was relegated to the reserve in 1996 and permanently stricken just 1 year later. June 2nd, 1969. The Soviet Black Sea Fleet strengthens its ranks with the commissioning of the PKR Leningrad. As the second and final Project 1123 helicopter carrier cruiser, she was structurally identical to her sister ship, the Moskva. However, engineers integrated vital, minor modifications derived from early operational lessons. While inheriting the same fundamental compromise between cruiser and carrier, the Leningrad would soon forge a far more dramatic and publicly visible frontline legacy during the height of the Cold War. Her defining hour struck in the aftermath of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. In 1974 and 1975, the Soviet military deployed the Leningrad to the heavily contested Suez Canal zone. Her specialized Kar-25 helicopters launched critical mine clearance operations, successfully reopening the strategic international waterway, which had been paralyzed since 1967. Witnessing Soviet aviation assets clear an Egyptian canal under international diplomatic arrangements was a stunning display of naval diplomacy. A unique mission impossible for standard cruisers. Plans for a superior third vessel were abruptly scrapped in favor of the newer Kiev-class. Relegated to reserve in 1991, Leningrad was broken up in 1994, concluding an operational life valued far more for institutional doctrine than raw tactical power. In the shadows of the Cold War arms race, Soviet naval visionaries dared to design the ultimate weapon, nuclear-powered supercarriers. Project 1160 emerged in the late 1960s as a towering 80,000-ton Leviathan. By the mid-1970s, it evolved into the refined 70,000-ton Project 1153. Armed with heavy steam catapults, these supercarriers were engineered to launch advanced Su-27K and MiG-29K fighters. This blueprint represented Admiral Gorshkov's ultimate dream, a force capable of genuine global power projection and robust fleet air defense. Yet, these massive warships were doomed before a single plate of steel could be cut. In 1973, Defense Minister Andrei Grechko vetoed Project 1160, asserting that Soviet strategic doctrine demanded denial of Western sea lanes rather than duplicating American power projection models. 5 years later, his successor, Dmitry Ustinov, axed Project 1153 under intense pressure from a resistant Air Force hierarchy. The ultimate irony was institutional. The elite supersonic fighters designed for these catapult-equipped decks were built anyway. Decades later, they were forced onto the Kuznetsov, heavily crippled by its restrictive ski jump ramp. The cancellation of the nuclear carriers proved that Soviet bureaucracy could build world-class aircraft, but lacked the strategic resolve to build the ultimate ships to launch them. December 28, 1975. The Soviet Union achieves a major milestone with the commissioning of the PKR Kiev. Displacing 40,000 tons with a massive 274-meter hull, this lead ship shattered conventions. To bypass the restrictive Montreux Convention barring true aircraft carriers from transiting the Turkish Straits, Moscow classified her as a heavy aviation carrying cruiser. This was no mere diplomatic trickery. The Kiev's massive forward deck was heavily weaponized, packed with devastating P-500 Basalt anti-ship missiles and formidable surface-to-air systems. Aviation-wise, she deployed the cutting-edge Yak-38 Forger, the USSR's first operational vertical takeoff and landing fighter. However, the Forger was a technological dead end. Hampered by a short combat radius and sluggish subsonic speeds, it was highly vulnerable. Kiev's true lethality lay in her 8 P-500 Basalt missiles, capable of launching sea-skimming strikes against American carrier groups from 500 kilometers away. Operating across the North Atlantic and Mediterranean, the Kiev generated intense Western surveillance. While her symbolic geopolitical impact was massive, her real tactical aviation capability remained severely modest. In 2000, this former Cold War vanguard suffered a bizarre final fate, sold to China and converted into a luxury hotel complex. September 27, 1978, the Soviet Navy commissions the PKR Minsk, the second ship of the iconic Kiev-class. Incorporating 300 additional tons of displacement and highly advanced sensor upgrades, this aviation cruiser was built for global reach, Assigned directly to the Pacific Fleet, the Minsk was ordered to project Soviet naval presence far beyond European waters, spearheading historic deployments into the vast Indian Ocean and through the strategic Malacca Strait. Her imposing silhouette sparked urgent monitoring by American, Japanese, and Indian intelligence networks. Yet, behind the aggressive propaganda layout lay a stark reality. Her Yak-38 fighters were so profoundly limited that Soviet commanders rarely assigned them genuine combat strike profiles. Pilots privately admitted the supersonic-looking jets were largely for public show. Conversely, her fleet of Ka-25 and Ka-27 helicopters provided a highly effective, lethal shield against hidden Western submarines. The Minsk symbolized a global Soviet challenge to American naval supremacy, but her true capability never matched her fearsome appearance. Following the collapse of the Soviet state, the decaying cruiser suffered an ignominious end. Sold to China in 1995, she was converted into a military theme park before being towed away for scrap. August 23, 1982. The Soviet Union fields the third evolution of the Kirov-class, the PKR Novorossiysk. Boasting a highly refined sensor suite and vastly improved crew habitability, this 42,000-ton heavy aviation cruiser was sent to Vladivostok to reinforce the Pacific Fleet. Yet, she would ultimately suffer the shortest, most tragic operational career of any Soviet carrier, serving barely 11 years before being crushed by history. Her commissioning coincided with the 1982 Falklands War, a conflict that deeply troubled Soviet naval analysts. They watched British carriers utilize Sea Harrier vertical takeoff jets to conduct high-stakes combat operations with devastating effectiveness. Crucially, the British Harriers completely outclassed the Soviet Yak-38 in range, electronics, and weapons capability. This uncomfortable reality proved that the Soviet vertical flight concept was fatally flawed. When the Soviet Union collapsed, a catastrophic economic crisis paralyzed the Russian Navy. Unable to maintain 4 massive aviation cruisers, Moscow abandoned the Novorossiysk, decommissioning her prematurely in 1993. Sold to South Korean shipbreakers and dismantled in India, she vanished from history, a stark monument to a design whose strategic purpose decayed faster than its steel hull. December 11, 1987. The ultimate evolution of the Project 1143 design enters service, the PKR Baku. Later renamed Admiral Gorshkov, this heavily modified 45,000-ton cruiser featured a revolutionary 12-degree ski jump ramp and cutting-edge sensor arrays. This crucial design shift abandoned the obsolete Yak-38, pointing directly toward the future of conventional naval aviation. However, a catastrophic shipboard fire in 1996 combined with a bankrupt post-Soviet economy, left her rusting and abandoned at the Severodvinsk shipyards. Then came a stunning multi-billion-dollar resurrection. In 2004, India purchased the crippled vessel, initiating one of the most complex naval reconstructions in history. Engineers completely stripped the ship, erasing her heavy Soviet missile decks to install a modern, Western standard flight deck optimized for advanced MiG-29K fighters. Reborn on November 16, 2013, as the INS Vikramaditya, she emerged as the undisputed flagship of the Indian Navy. Operating 16 supersonic fighters and an extensive helicopter wing, she achieved the true carrier capability her Soviet designers could only dream of. The Baku's epic second life completely eclipsed her first. The Soviet Union built a flawed cruiser, India transformed it into the ultimate instrument of modern naval power. January 21st, 1990. The Soviet Navy finally unleashes its first true aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov. Displacing nearly 60,000 tons and stretching over 300 meters, this massive vessel utilized a unique 14-degree ski jump ramp to launch high-performance Su-33 flanker fighters without complex steam catapults. Today, she survives as Russia's lone aircraft carrier, though her career is defined more by catastrophic misfortune than naval triumph. In 2016, the Kuznetsov sailed to the Syrian coast, launching Russia's historic first carrier-based combat strikes. However, the deployment exposed severe technical rot. 2 advanced fighters were lost to frayed, failing arresting cables that snap-crashed into the sea. Worse still, her notoriously unreliable steam turbines routinely force her to deploy alongside an embarrassing ocean-going rescue tug in case of total propulsion failure. Since 2017, the ill-fated carrier has been trapped in an endless cursed refit in Murmansk. She narrowly survived a massive dry dock sinking in 2018, followed by a deadly onboard fire in 2019. Plagued by continuous delays, Russia's ultimate symbol of naval ambition remains sidelined, a floating ghost story whose return to the sea is pushed back past 2025. 1998. In the wake of the Soviet collapse, an incomplete Phantom ship sits rusting in a Ukrainian shipyard. This was the Varyag, the 68% finished sister ship to the Kuznetsov. Desperate for cash, Ukraine sold the massive hull for a mere $25 million to a Macau travel agency, which claimed they would convert her into a floating casino. It was an audacious, transparent lie. The real buyer was the Chinese military. Towed across a grueling 26,000-kilometer ocean journey, the hull arrived at Dalian. There, Chinese engineers achieved a miraculous resurrection. They completely rebuilt her structure, installed powerful engines, integrated advanced weapon systems, and commissioned her on September 25, 2012, as the CNS Liaoning, China's historic first aircraft carrier. Flying reverse-engineered J-15 Flying Shark fighters, the ship became the ultimate training platform for a rising superpower. The Varyag, once dismissed by the West as useless Cold War scrap, became the foundational cornerstone of China's massive modern carrier fleet. The vital lessons learned from her ski jump deck directly birthed the domestic carrier Shandong. A single $25 million transaction fundamentally shifted the global balance of naval power forever. November 25, 1988. The Soviet Union lays down its ultimate naval masterpiece, the Ulyanovsk. Designed as a 75,000-ton nuclear-powered supercarrier, she was Moscow's ultimate answer to America's Nimitz-class. Armed with 4 nuclear reactors for limitless range and 4 cutting-edge electromagnetic catapults, she was engineered to launch a massive 70-aircraft air wing at full combat weight. This giant completely abandoned heavy defensive missiles, relying instead on its lethal Su-33K and MiG-29K fighters for absolute offensive striking power. She would have shattered 3 decades of institutional compromise and doctrinal confusion, but the Ulyanovsk was born too late. In November 1991, with the hull 40% complete, the Soviet Union suddenly fractured and collapsed. By February 1992, the newly independent Ukrainian government faced a brutal economic crisis. Recognizing that Russia could never pay to finish the warship, Ukraine ordered the half-built supercarrier brutally cut apart on the very slipway where she was born. Her premium steel was sold off as raw scrap metal. The most capable aircraft carrier the Soviet Empire ever conceived died without ever touching the water, a tragic monument to a superpower that ran out of time. Between 1977 and 1985, a quiet but devastating war was waged inside Kremlin briefing rooms. The prize? The blueprint for the future Soviet fleet. It began as the Project 1160 Orel, a magnificent 70,000-ton nuclear-powered supercarrier equipped with steam catapults, fully capable of rivaling America's best. Yet, through a grueling series of bureaucratic battles, this grand vision was systematically stripped down, eventually mutating into the Project 1143.5 Kuznetsov, a conventionally powered ship restricted by a ski jump ramp. Every single design reduction marked a crushing institutional defeat for the legendary Admiral Gorshkov. In 1979, Defense Minister Dmitry Ustinov stripped the nuclear reactors, ruling that Soviet shipyards could not build nuclear carriers and Kirov-class battlecruisers simultaneously. In 1981, the Soviet Air Force successfully killed the steam catapult program, forcing a compromise ski jump design instead. Gorshkov fought fiercely for catapults until his death in 1988, warning that ski jumps would cripple fighter payloads and severely undermine combat effectiveness. History vindicated the admiral. Su-33 pilots were routinely forced to sacrifice fuel and weapons just to take off. The architect of the Soviet global navy died watching his ultimate dream built to specifications he spent a lifetime fighting against. The project at 1160 Orel remains the ultimate what-if of Cold War naval history. This ambitious design detailed an 80,000-ton nuclear-powered Titan armed with twin steam catapults. It was engineered to deploy a lethal air wing of 60 to 70 advanced fixed-wing fighters, including navalized Su-27Ks. Championed by Admiral Gorshkov, the Orel was the closest the USSR ever came to matching the American Nimitz class. But in 1976, Defense Minister Andrei Grechko abruptly killed the project with a devastating ideological decree. Carriers were weapons of aggression unsuited to Soviet doctrine. This political veto was operationally flawed. While Western carriers projected offensive power, Gorshkov's Orel had a strictly defensive mission, shielding vulnerable Soviet ballistic missile submarine bastions from NATO attacks. Grechko's refusal reflected the Soviet military hierarchy's deep-seated bias toward ground forces alongside intense Air Force resistance against a maritime aviation rival. The death of the Orel forced Gorshkov into an endless cycle of compromised, inferior carrier designs. Had this nuclear giant been built, Soviet naval history would have been completely rewritten. Instead, it was reduced to paper, a casualty of Kremlin politics that left the Soviet fleet permanently outgunned on the open ocean. 1939. The Soviet Union stands on the precipice of a global conflagration, institutionally and tactically unprepared for the storm to come. At the vanguard of its surface fleet is the Project 7 Nevny-class destroyer. Born from a technology transfer with the Italian firm Ansaldo, these sleek, aggressive warships trace their lineage directly to the Navigatori class. On sea trials, they are blistering fast, cutting through the waves at an astonishing 38 knots. Armed with 4 130mm guns and 6 torpedo tubes, they are built around a hardline Soviet doctrine. aggressive, high-speed torpedo execution. Yet, beneath their beautiful lines lies a fatal flaw. The complex Italian-designed propulsion machinery requires a level of engineering expertise that Soviet crews simply have not yet mastered. When thrust into the brutal operating conditions of the Baltic and Black Seas, engines fail catastrophically. Combined with relentless enemy action, the results are devastating. Out of 24 Nevny-class destroyers commissioned, a shocking 16 are lost to combat or accidents. This staggering 67% attrition rate represents a loss unmatched by any other major navy in World War II, serving as a grim monument to a fleet forced to learn the art of modern naval warfare through steel and fire. As the lessons of the Gnevny-class are written in blood, Soviet naval architects pivot quickly. Enter the project 7U Sobrazitelny-class. Commissioned between 1940 and 1942, these 18 warships feature a critical evolution. Fragile Italian machinery is ripped out, replaced by robust, Soviet-designed turbine engines. While top speed drops slightly to 36.5 knots, operational reliability skyrockets. The results speak for themselves. In the crucible of World War II, only 3 of the 18 ships are lost, proving the immense value of engineering independence. The undisputed legend of the class is the lead ship herself, Sobrazitelny, a name meaning resourceful or quick-witted. Operating in the fiercely contested Black Sea, she becomes the most celebrated Soviet destroyer of the war, earning 12 battle honors, the prestigious Guards title, and the Order of the Red Banner. Across 43 combat operations, Sobrazitelny braves relentless enemy fire to escort vital supply convoys to besieged strongholds like Sevastopol and Novorossiysk, evacuate desperate troops, and unleash furious shore bombardments. She proves a vital maxim that would forever guide all future Soviet naval design. Raw speed is a luxury, but the ability to get underway and fight on demand is an absolute combat necessity. With the dawn of the Cold War, Joseph Stalin unleashes a massive naval construction program driven by a singular determination: to challenge Western supremacy in European waters through sheer numerical dominance. The instruments of this strategy are the Project 30 Ognavoy and its post-war production variant, the Project 30 Bis Skory-class. Built between 1949 and 1954 across 4 shipyards simultaneously, an astonishing 70 Skory-class destroyers roll off the lines, making it the largest single post-war destroyer program in history. These warships are heavily armed evolutionary designs, packing 10 533mm torpedo tubes across 2 massive quintuple mounts. Soviet doctrine dictates a terrifying tactic: destroyer flotillas operating in packs of 4 to 6 ships, unleashing coordinated, overwhelming salvos capable of saturating and destroying entire Western cruiser task forces. The Skory-class becomes the face of early Soviet naval diplomacy, extensively exported to allies like China, Egypt, Indonesia, and Poland. In 1962, these hulls find themselves on the front lines of global apocalypse, deploying during the high-stakes naval blockade of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Their aggressive presence in the Atlantic forces Western planners to realize that a dangerous new superpower has truly arrived on the world's high seas. By the mid-1950s, Soviet naval strategy undergoes a profound shift, moving away from sheer mass production toward advanced, high-quality engineering. The breakthrough comes with the Project 56 Kotlin-class. Commissioned between 1956 and 1958, These 27 warships represent the Soviet Navy's first truly modern post-war destroyer design. Cutting through water at a blistering 38.5 knots, the Kotlin possesses a refined hull and advanced turbines that match any Western contemporary. Originally sporting twin 130mm turrets and 10 torpedo tubes, the class soon faces a dangerous new reality: the threat of supersonic jet aircraft. In 1962, the Soviets pioneer a revolutionary upgrade. Under the Project 56A and 56K modifications, the aft gun turrets are torn away to install the twin-arm Volna surface-to-air missile system, the very first SAMs fitted onto a Soviet destroyer. Though limited to a 10-kilometer range, the Volna system establishes a permanent doctrine of guided missile air defense. Upgraded for anti-submarine warfare with RBU 2,500 rocket launchers, Kotlins assert their presence globally. During the tense 1973 Yom Kippur War, they shadow United States 6th Fleet carrier groups in the Mediterranean, proving the Soviet Union can project lethal power across the global ocean expanses with absolute confidence and strategic authority. In 1958, the Soviet Navy changes the rules of surface engagement forever. Seeking a way to counter superior Western carrier strike groups, naval engineers look to the Kotlin hull and reshape it into a pioneering weapon system, the Project 57 Bis-Kildin-class. These 4 vessels become the first destroyers in naval history to be armed with anti-ship cruise missiles. Out goes the aft 130mm gun turret, replaced by the massive rail-launched Strela missile, known to NATO as the SSN-1 Scrubber. This introduces a revolutionary doctrine, engaging enemy warships from far beyond the horizon, long before defensive guns can fire. Though the early Strela missile is subsonic, the Kildin class represents a terrifying proof of concept. All 4 ships are later upgraded to the Project 57A configuration, carrying the deadly P-15 Termit or SSN-2 Styx missile. In 1967, the world watches in shock as Styx missiles sink the Israeli destroyer Eilat from 15 kilometers away. The strike sends shockwaves through Western navies, forcing an urgent reassessment of surface ship vulnerability. 4 converted Soviet destroyers had completely rewritten the manual on modern naval warfare, proving to the world that the terrifying age of the guided missile had arrived. The era of traditional gun battles was officially dead. 1962 marks a staggering technological milestone that catches Western intelligence completely off guard. The Soviet Navy commissions the Project 61 Kashin-class, the world's first major warships, powered entirely by gas turbines, utilizing a revolutionary combined gas turbine. And gas turbine, or COGAG arrangement, 4 massive M3 turbines unleash 96,000 shaft horsepower. This propels the sleek ships to a blistering 38 knots. More importantly, it slashes cold start readiness from agonizing hours to less than 10 minutes, fundamentally transforming Soviet naval response times. Western navies would not match this propulsion milestone for over a decade. Designated as large anti-submarine ships, the 20 Kashins are formidable multi-mission platforms, packing twin Volna surface-to-air missiles, torpedoes, and RBU 6000 anti-submarine rocket launchers. But pushing the boundaries of technology brings danger. In 1974, a catastrophic missile fuel explosion rips through the Otvazhny in the Black Sea, igniting her magazine and claiming 24 lives in a tightly classified disaster. Yet, the design proves highly successful, leading to the export of 5 heavily modified units to India as the Rajput-class, which see intense combat action and solidify gas turbine propulsion as the definitive global standard for modern, high-performance warships in the 20th century. The shocking destruction of the Israeli destroyer Eilat in 1967 reverberates deeply within the Kremlin. The lesson is undeniable. Every destroyer in the Soviet inventory must possess anti-ship missiles, regardless of its primary role. To realize this vision without building new hulls from scratch, naval leadership orders the conversion of 8 Kashin-class vessels, creating the Project 61M and 61MP modified Kashin. Operating between 1973 and 1977, engineers exploit a unique design advantage. Because the original ship's gas turbines left the afterdeck free of bulky steam plant piping, there is ample space for a dramatic weapons retrofit. Workers install a devastating and heavy quadruple P-15M Termit anti-ship missile launcher aft, giving these vessels a terrifying anti-surface punch. To counter the rising threat of low-altitude sea-skimming missiles, an OSA-M close-in missile system is integrated amidships, covering the defensive gaps of the older Volna systems. This lethal conversion successfully transforms the Kashin into a true multi-mission threat. Deploying aggressively across the vast expanses of the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, these heavily armed ships present a constantly visible and dangerous challenge to Western naval intelligence, establishing the definitive multi-mission template that would define the next generation of Soviet surface combatants. As the Cold War reaches its final tense decade, the Soviet Navy unleashes a warship engineered with a singular, terrifying objective: the destruction of American aircraft carriers. This is the Project 956 Sovremeny-class. Commissioned starting in 1980, this 7,000-ton Leviathan is built entirely around 8 P-2-70 Moskit anti-ship cruise missiles, known to NATO as the SSN-22 Sunburn. Skimming the waves at a blistering Mach 2.5, the Sunburn gives target vessels less than 30 seconds of warning from radar detection to catastrophic impact. An onslaught designed to completely saturate and overwhelm Aegis defenses. Curiously, the Sovremeny rejects the gas turbine trend, utilizing heavy steam turbines instead. This choice provides the massive electrical power required by the Moskit's targeting systems and handles extreme operating temperatures. Between 1999 and 2006, China purchases 4 of these formidable ships to directly counter potential American intervention in a Taiwan Strait conflict. For Chinese naval strategists, the Sunburn missile completely alters the strategic balance of power. Coordinated with naval aviation, a single Sovremeny can unleash a multi-directional, simultaneous supersonic strike specifically designed to keep American carrier battle groups at bay, transforming this late Cold War titan into a modern instrument of absolute strategic denial. To conquer the oceans, the Soviet Navy implements a brilliant, complementary tactical doctrine, pairing the surface-killing Sovremeny with a specialized submarine hunter. This lethal, silent service killer is the Project 1155 Udaloy 1 class. Commissioned between 1980 and 1991, 12 of these massive warships are meticulously built to dominate the hostile underwater battlefield. The Udaloy is designed around the powerful SS-N-14 Silex anti-submarine rocket, boasting a 45-kilometer range that allows it to crush enemy attack submarines long before they can close to launch torpedoes. Operating 2 K-27 Helix anti-submarine helicopters for extended long-range acoustic detection, and carrying 64 Kinjal short-range surface-to-air missiles in cutting-edge vertical launch cells for robust point defense. The Udaloy is a truly formidable floating fortress. In the high-stakes chess match of the late Cold War, Udaloy and Sovremeny pairs shadow American carrier groups across the Atlantic and Pacific. While the Sovremeny focuses its deadly sights on the carrier, the Udaloy hunts down the stealthy American submarines lurking below. Though several units remain active within Russia's Northern and Pacific fleets today, maintenance standards have severely degraded since the tragic collapse of the Soviet Union. This leaves these once proud apex submarine hunters operating as fading, aging sentinels of a bygone superpower era. January 1999. The Russian Navy commissions the Admiral Chabanenko, the sole completed vessel of the project, 1155.1 Udaloy II class. She represents both the technical apex of Soviet destroyer development and the single most devastating and consequential casualty of the Soviet Union's collapse. Originally, 3 of these 9,000-ton Titans were planned, but economic ruin and political chaos halted the program. The Udaloy II achieves what Soviet naval doctrine had long desired. It successfully merges the deadly anti-submarine warfare capabilities of the Udaloy I with the terrifying anti-ship firepower of the Sovremeny into a single, unified hull. Engineers packed this massive hull with 8 supersonic Moskit anti-ship cruise missiles, advanced SS-N-15 anti-submarine weapons, and a lethal, rapid-fire twin 130mm AK-130 main gun mount capable of cycling 40 rounds per minute to vastly outrange Western destroyer batteries. This formidable arsenal transformed the Chabanenko into an independent, multi-mission monster capable of threatening carrier battle groups while simultaneously hunting their submarine screens. Today, she remains operational in the Russian Northern Fleet, a lone, powerful ghost of a vanished empire. She stands as a striking reminder of what the Soviet Navy was actively building when the clock ran out, a testament to raw naval ambition starved by modern economic reality. Straddling the fractured line between 2 eras, the Project 11,540 New Strashmy class stands as a poignant symbol of post-Soviet naval decline. Designed as a highly capable multi-role frigate, the class was intended to replace older, deteriorating fleet elements, but instead became a monument to industrial collapse. Of the 4 planned ships, only 2 were ever completed. The lead vessel was commissioned in 1993, just a year after the Soviet dissolution. The second ship, Yaroslav Mudry, became a painful industrial tragedy, taking an agonizing 16 years to complete as shipyards starved for funding. Despite these crippling domestic struggles, the design itself is a masterpiece of compact, multi-role engineering. It incorporates lessons from the Sovremeny and Udaloy, packing a comprehensive anti-submarine suite featuring ox-yoke bow sonar and an oxtail variable depth towed array. Armed with SS-N-25 Switchblade anti-ship missiles and Kinjal SAMs, it provides credible firepower without extreme specialization. In the 2000s and 2010s, both ships sailed into the spotlight, conducting global anti-piracy operations in the dangerous waters of the Gulf of Aden. They triumphantly proved to watching Western eyes that while the surface fleet had shrunk dramatically, Russian naval ambition could still project lethal power across the world's oceans. Entering service in October 2018, the Project 22,350 Admiral Gorshkov-class represents the front line of the Russian surface fleet, carrying immense striking power within a compact hull. However, its painful 12-year journey from the laying of her keel to commissioning exposes the severe degradation of Russia's defense industrial base. The program suffered crippling delays after the 2014 geopolitical crisis, which abruptly cut off access to vital Ukrainian-sourced gearboxes, forcing a long and difficult transition to domestic development. Despite these severe industrial bottlenecks, the Gorshkov-class packs a terrifying punch. It features an advanced 16-cell UKSK universal vertical launch system capable of firing Caliber land attack cruise missiles, supersonic Onyx anti-ship missiles, and the newly announced unstoppable Zircon hypersonic cruise weapon. Since 2022, these warships have actively engaged in military operations within Ukraine, launching devastating precision caliber cruise missile strikes against critical inland infrastructure from the relative safety of the Black Sea. This combat record proves that modern Russia retains the technical genius to build world-class warships. Yet, with only 4 advanced hulls in service by 2024, the harsh reality remains. These advanced frigates are highly capable individual platforms, but they lack the sheer numbers required to restore the legendary global blue water dominance of the vanished Soviet Navy. In the wake of World War II, Joseph Stalin faced a terrifying reality. The Soviet Navy was overwhelmingly inferior to Western maritime power. The response was swift and relentless. Project 613, known to NATO as the Whiskey-class. Rocketing out of secret Soviet shipyards, these vessels were derived directly from captured blueprints of the legendary German Type 21 U-boat. Between 1951 and 1957, the Soviet Union launched an astounding 215 Whiskies, making it the most mass-produced submarine class in post-war history. At peak production, 4 shipyards operated simultaneously, delivering a brand new submarine every 9 days. While their actual combat record remained at 0, their intelligence footprint was massive. The class earned global notoriety on October 27, 1981, when the Whiskey-class boat U-137 suddenly ran aground deep inside Swedish territorial waters, right next to the highly sensitive Karlskrona naval base. Dubbed the Whiskey on the Rocks incident, it triggered an intense international standoff. Swedish investigators concluded the heavily armed intruder was actively conducting clandestine surveillance on their most critical defense installations. It proved that even as obsolete relics, these Cold War predators remained an enduring, dangerous threat to the Western alliance, completely defying their age and technological obsolescence. As the Cold War escalated, the Kremlin demanded a weapon capable of striking the American heartland from the sea. Enter Project 611, designated by NATO as the Zulu-class. Between 1952 and 1957, 26 of these long-range, ocean-going attack submarines were constructed to project Soviet power across the globe. However, 5 specific Zulu 4 hulls were selected for a radical, history-making transformation into the Zulu 5 configuration. Equipped with 2 massive R-11FM ballistic missiles, these modified vessels became the world's very first operational ballistic missile submarines. On September 16, 1955, a full 2 years before the historic launch of Sputnik, a Zulu Vow successfully conducted the world's first submarine-launched ballistic missile test. Yet, this terrifying breakthrough masked a fatal vulnerability. The R-11FM missile possessed a meager range of just 150 kilometers and required a surface launch. Preparing the missile took 12 grueling hours. To fire, the submarine had to surface, remain completely stationary while fueling, and sit dangerously close to hostile shores. Against any modern Western coastal defense, deploying the Zulu was a literal suicide mission. Yet, it proved the concept, establishing the terrifying foundation for global naval nuclear deterrence. In October 1962, the world held its breath during the Cuban Missile Crisis, unaware that a single Soviet submarine was about to trigger World War III. Project 641, the Foxtrot-class, was a fleet of 75 long-range patrol submarines built between 1958 and 1971. Operating deep within the American naval quarantine line around Cuba, the Foxtrot-class boat B-59 was relentlessly hunted by U.S. destroyers dropping practice depth charges. Inside the sweltering, suffocating hull, communication with Moscow was completely cut off. Convinced that global nuclear war had already erupted, the exhausted Captain Valentin Savitsky made a fateful choice. He ordered the ship's T-5 nuclear torpedo, armed with a devastating 15-kiloton warhead, to be prepared for immediate launch. Soviet protocol dictated that 3 senior officers on board had to unanimously approve the launch. 2 gave their consent. The third, Flotilla Commander Vasily Arkhipov, steadfastly refused, enduring intense pressure from his peers. Arkhipov's solitary defiance prevailed. B-59 surfaced, the nuclear weapon remained secure, and humanity narrowly escaped a thermonuclear holocaust. His courageous refusal stands as arguably the most consequential, life-saving individual act of the entire Cold War. While some submarines are remembered for their frontline combat operations, Project 633, known to NATO as the Romeo-class, reshaped global geopolitics through an unprecedented technology transfer. Built between 1958 and 1961, only 21 Romeos were commissioned into the Soviet Navy. Instead, their true historical legacy lies in the massive sharing of complete design blueprints and manufacturing documentation with the People's Republic of China. This critical defense partnership, spanning from 1957 to 1960, ground to a sudden, screeching halt when Premier Nikita Khrushchev abruptly withdrew all Soviet military and technical advisors due to deep ideological rifts. Left completely on their own, determined Chinese engineers reverse-engineered the absorbed knowledge and tooling. They successfully mass-produced the modified Type 033 class, which rapidly became the absolute backbone of the People's Liberation Army Navy's submarine fleet for more than 3 decades. The Kremlin's fateful decision to initially export this critical technology, followed by the sudden withdrawal of support, ultimately forced China to develop a self-sustaining domestic defense industry. This single geopolitical pivot shaped the trajectory of Chinese naval development more than any other external event in modern history, permanently rewriting the balance of Asian power. As nuclear propulsion came to dominate the depths, the Soviet Navy refused to abandon conventional diesel technology, perfecting it to create a silent, lethal stalker. Project 641B, the Tango-class, was a fleet of 18 long-endurance patrol submarines constructed between 1973 and 1982. At the time of its introduction, the Tango was the largest conventional diesel-electric submarine in active service anywhere on Earth. This massive hull was specifically engineered to accommodate a significantly expanded internal battery installation, granting the vessel truly exceptional submerged endurance for a non-nuclear craft. Furthermore, the Tango was packed with heavy firepower. Its specialized 650mm torpedo tubes were designed to deploy the lethal Type 65 wake-homing torpedo. This advanced weapon could detect and relentlessly track the turbulent cavitation wake left by Western surface warships at extreme ranges of up to 50 kilometers. Serving with distinction throughout the final 2 decades of the Cold War, Tangos patrolled vital choke points for the Northern and Black Sea fleets. Their incredible reliability and heavy weapon capabilities allowed them to maintain frontline operational relevance within the Russian Navy well into the early 2000s. The dawn of the Soviet nuclear navy was forged in a reckless race for technological supremacy, where human lives were traded for speed. Project 627, designated by NATO as the November-class, represented the Soviet Union's first ever nuclear-powered attack submarines, with 13 hulls constructed between 1958 and 1963. While these vessels proved that Soviet engineers could successfully harness atomic energy for under-ice propulsion, they also exposed a horrific disregard for human safety. In the rush to beat the Americans, the critical reactor shielding was severely compromised. Crews operating these early reactors were exposed to terrifying levels of raw radiation that far exceeded any permissible safety limits. Unsuspecting sailors accumulated lethal lifetime radiation doses in mere months rather than years. The hidden dangers of the November-class tragically manifested on April 12, 1970, when the submarine K-8 suffered a catastrophic dual reactor fire and severe flooding while navigating the turbulent waters of the Bay of Biscay. The vessel foundered and sank into the abyss, claiming the lives of 52 crew members. It marked the first official loss of a Soviet nuclear submarine at sea. In the high-stakes arena of strategic nuclear deterrence, the Soviet Union introduced Project 658, the Hotel-class. Built between 1959 and 1962, these 8 vessels were the Kremlin's very first nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. However, the history of this class is forever bound to its most infamous hull, the ill-fated K-19. On July 4, 1961, while operating deep in the North Atlantic, K-19's primary reactor coolant circuit suffered a catastrophic rupture. With a total nuclear core meltdown imminent, Captain Nikolai Zateyev ordered a desperate, jury-rigged repair. An extraordinary team of 8 machinist mates volunteered to enter the heavily irradiated reactor compartment without any protective suits. Working in a lethal mist, they successfully welded a temporary cooling line, saving the ship at the ultimate cost of their lives. All 8 died agonizing deaths within weeks. The cursed reputation of the vessel only deepened over time. K-19 would later suffer 2 more devastating operational accidents in 1969 and 1972, claiming even more crew members. The Hotel-class became the ultimate grim symbol of the foundational sacrifices and mechanical failures that haunted the early Soviet nuclear fleet. To counter the overwhelming power of the United States Navy, the Soviet Union designed a specialized class of naval predators engineered specifically to hunt and destroy American aircraft carrier battle groups. Project 6, 59, and 675, known to Western intelligence as the Echo 1 and Echo 2 classes, saw 34 hulls constructed between 1961 and 1968. These massive nuclear-powered, guided missile submarines were built entirely around an aggressive offensive capability, carrying heavy anti-ship missiles. According to records, these P-700 cruise missiles could fly at a blistering Mach 2.5 over distances reaching up to 500 kilometers. However, the Echo-class suffered from an embarrassingly visible and tactically dangerous operational limitation. To launch its payload, the submarine was forced to surface and remain completely stationary throughout the lengthy launch sequence. A surfaced submarine was an incredibly vulnerable target for American anti-submarine forces. To overcome this critical flaw, Soviet naval doctrine relied on overwhelming brute force rather than stealth. They planned coordinated, mass saturation attacks, utilizing multiple Echo submarines simultaneously, aiming to flood Western defensive screens with an unstoppable barrage of high-speed missiles before they could be picked off. Not every submarine leaves its mark through active combat. Some reshape history through the enduring mysteries of their destruction. Project 629, known to NATO as the Golf-class, consisted of 23 diesel-electric ballistic missile submarines built between 1959 and 1962. The class achieved its most profound geopolitical impact not through operational success, but through a catastrophic loss. On March 8, 1968, the Golf-class submarine K-129 mysteriously foundered and sank into the crushing depths of the Pacific Ocean, taking all 98 crew members down with her. Recognizing an unprecedented intelligence goldmine, the CIA launched a highly classified, multi-million-dollar salvage operation codenamed Project Azorian. Utilizing a specially constructed deep-sea recovery vessel named the Glomar Explorer, the United States attempted to secretly raise the entire sunken hull from the ocean floor in 1974. Ultimately, the daring covert operation succeeded in recovering approximately one-third of K-129's forward section. This retrieved portion contained vital Soviet codebooks, the forward torpedo room housing 2 nuclear-armed torpedoes, and the physical remains of 6 Soviet sailors. The recovered crewmen were respectfully given a formal military burial at sea, closing a dramatic chapter of Cold War espionage. By the late 1960s, the underwater arms race reached a terrifying new equilibrium. Project 667A, designated by NATO as the Yankee-class, provided the Soviet Union with its very first genuine modern at-sea nuclear deterrent deployed in numbers large enough to be operationally credible. Between 1967 and 1974, a total of 34 Yankee 1 and 8 Yankee 2 submarines were commissioned into active service. These sleek nuclear vessels routinely conducted aggressive patrols in the Atlantic Ocean, creeping as close as 500 miles from the American eastern seaboard. From these forward positions, their ballistic missiles could strike Washington, D.C. in less than 10 minutes, leaving virtually zero time for a response. But operating under such extreme pressure carried immense risk. On October 3, 1986, the Yankee-class submarine K-219 suffered a catastrophic missile tube explosion and subsequent toxic fire approximately 480 miles northeast of Bermuda. Despite the crew's heroic efforts to stabilize the reactor, the crippled vessel sank into the abyss on October 6th. This international crisis unfolded just 2 weeks before the high-stakes Reykjavik summit between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, casting a dark shadow over global peace talks. The evolution of the Soviet strategic fleet reached its apex with the deployment of the Delta-class, a series of 43 submarines spanning 4 distinct variants built between 1972 and 1992. This massive program fundamentally rewrote the mathematical equations of Cold War nuclear deterrence. Soviet engineers achieved a critical breakthrough by equipping these vessels with long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. This meant Delta submarines no longer needed to cross dangerous Atlantic choke points to reach their launch zones. Instead, they could remain safely stationed within home waters or hide deep beneath the impenetrable Arctic ice pack. In these bastions, American anti-submarine warfare assets could not effectively track or engage them, yet the Delta's missiles could easily strike targets across the entire continental United States. The destructive scale of these bastions remains staggering. A single Delta IV submarine at sea carries 16 missiles packed with up to 160 independently targetable nuclear warheads, capable of annihilating 160 separate cities. The enduring engineering of this Cold War design is proven by its longevity. 5 modernized Delta IV submarines still remain fully active frontline assets within the modern Russian Navy today, preserving a terrifying second strike capability. To hunt Western ballistic missile submarines and protect their own bastions, the Soviet Navy developed the workhorse of their attack fleet, Project 671, the Victor-class. Produced across 3 increasingly sophisticated variants between 1967 and 1992, 49 of these nuclear-powered attack submarines were unleashed into the world's oceans. The appearance of the final variant, the Victor III, shocked Western intelligence agencies and turned into a major international scandal. Western analysts discovered that the Soviet Union had covertly obtained advanced, highly restricted milling machine technology from Toshiba and Kongsberg. This illicit machinery allowed Soviet shipyards to achieve precision machining of propeller blades, drastically reducing the acoustic signature of their hulls. The Victor III was far quieter than anyone in the West had predicted, instantly threatening American underwater acoustic superiority. In response, the United States was forced to commit approximately $1 billion in urgent torpedo development to counter this silent threat. Furthermore, the Victor III featured a distinctive hydrodynamic pod on its tail fin housing a towed sonar array. This gave the class an advanced passive detection capability against quiet Western submarines that previous Soviet attack designs had completely lacked. The tactical vulnerability of early cruise missile submarines forced Soviet engineers to pioneer a revolutionary leap in underwater warfare. Project 670, known as the Charlie I and II classes, consisted of 17 submarines built between 1968 and 1980. This innovative design finally solved the fatal flaw that made the older Echo-class operationally suicidal: the requirement to surface before launching missiles. The Charlie-class was equipped with the P-70 Amethyst anti-ship missile, which could be fired directly from angled launch tubes while the vessel remained completely submerged. While an Echo-class boat attempting an attack became a glaring, stationary radar target for 15 minutes, a Charlie-class submarine could unleash its deadly salvo from a submerged depth at a range of 65 kilometers. At this distance, The attacking vessel was virtually undetectable to Western strike groups, identifiable only by active sonar at extremely close range. This highly effective stealth platform also served as an instrument of global geopolitics. From 1988 to 1991, the Soviet Union leased a Charlie-class submarine to the Indian Navy, where it was commissioned as the INS Chakra, initiating a long tradition of strategic submarine diplomacy between Moscow and New Delhi. In the annals of Cold War naval engineering, no vessel challenged Western maritime supremacy, quite like Project 705, the legendary Alfa-class. Built between 1971 and 1981, these 7 revolutionary nuclear-powered attack submarines represented Soviet engineering pushed to its absolute radical extreme. Constructed with a lightweight, ultra-strong titanium hull, the Alfa could achieve an astonishing diving depth exceeding 700 meters. By heavily automating the reactor and steering systems, engineers reduced the necessary crew to just 32 officers. Most terrifying of all was its speed. The Alfa could exceed 41 knots submerged, making it faster than any standard torpedo in the United States inventory. Shocked American naval planners initially classified the Alfa as a lethal threat without an existing countermeasure. To eliminate this underwater interceptor, the US Pentagon poured roughly $1 billion into developing the high-speed AD-cap torpedo program specifically to catch the elusive Soviet craft. Ultimately, the Alfa's radical technology proved to be its undoing. The complex liquid metal-cooled reactors were notoriously difficult and expensive to maintain in active service. By 1990, all 7 were decommissioned, proving that while the Alfa achieved the impossible, it was simply not operationally sustainable. At the height of the Cold War arms race, the Soviet Union unleashed the ultimate symbol of maritime dread, Project 941, the Typhoon class. Displacing an incredible 48,000 tons when fully loaded, these 6 Leviathans built between 1981 and 1989 remain the largest submarines ever constructed in human history. The Typhoon was specifically engineered to survive a nuclear war and guarantee a devastating second strike retaliation. Its massive, unique double-hulled construction was so heavily armored that Western intelligence calculated it would take at least 2 direct nuclear torpedo hits to reliably destroy a single vessel. Each Typhoon was packed with apocalyptic firepower, carrying 20 R-39 ballistic missiles. With each missile armed with 10 independently targetable warheads, a single submarine controlled 200 nuclear weapons capable of annihilating 200 separate targets. Collectively, the 6 Typhoons deployed 1,200 warheads, a strategic arsenal the United States could never guarantee it could eliminate in a preemptive first strike. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, 5 of these giants were decommissioned due to extreme costs. However, the lead ship, TK-208, was modified to test the modern Bulava missile, famously outlasting the very superpower it was built to defend. Designed to be the ultimate executioner of Western naval power, Project 949 and 949A, the Oscar-class, represented the pinnacle of Soviet anti-carrier doctrine. Between 1980 and 1996, 2 Oscar 1 and 11 expanded Oscar 2 submarines were constructed. Each of these massive guided missile vessels was armed with 24 devastating P-700 Granite cruise missiles. Flying at a blistering Mach 2.5 over distances exceeding 550 kilometers, these intelligent missiles could communicate with one another mid-flight, coordinating their targeting to intentionally prioritize the primary aircraft carrier over its surrounding defensive escorts. However, the terrifying legacy of the Oscar-class is forever defined by a peacetime tragedy. On August 12, 2000, the Oscar II submarine K-141 Kursk suffered a catastrophic internal torpedo explosion and sank to the bottom of the Barents Sea. In the pitch-black aftermath, 23 sailors managed to survive in the sealed aft compartment for several agonizing hours. Despite immediate, urgent offers of advanced deep-sea rescue assistance from Norway and Great Britain, proud Russian officials refused international help for 5 critical days. When international divers finally opened the escape hatch on August 21st, all 23 survivors had tragically suffocated. In their relentless pursuit of deep-diving, invulnerable warships, Soviet naval designers occasionally fell victim to their own engineering ambitions. Project 945, known to NATO as the Sierra-class, repeated the fundamental mistakes of the earlier Alfa-class, but on a significantly larger scale. Built between 1984 and 1993, the Sierra program consisted of 2 Sierra 1 and 2 Sierra 2 nuclear-powered attack submarines. Like the Alpha, the Sierra-class featured an advanced hull constructed entirely out of specialized titanium alloy. This high-tech metallurgy granted the submarines unparalleled structural strength, allowing them to safely operate at extreme diving depths ranging between 550 and 750 meters. Yet, these exceptional capabilities came at an astronomical financial burden. The complex fabrication and welding of titanium proved to be incredibly difficult, costing approximately 3 to 4 times more than equivalent steel-hulled submarine construction. This staggering price tag severely restricted production, limiting the fleet to just 4 completed vessels. Ultimately, the Sierra-class stood as a brilliant engineering triumph that was completely crippled by economic reality, failing to achieve the production numbers required to possess any real operational significance during the Cold War. For decades, the United States Navy maintained a comfortable, decisive advantage in underwater warfare through a single factor: stealth. That dominance evaporated with the arrival of Project 971, the Akula-class. Built between 1984 and 2001, these 15 hulls represented the most capable and deadly nuclear-powered attack submarines ever produced by the Soviet Union. The Akula completely shocked Western intelligence, forcing American acoustic analysts to drastically revise their long-held estimates regarding the submarine noise gap. Soviet designers achieved this acoustic breakthrough by implementing a revolutionary new reactor design, comprehensive internal shock-absorbing damping mounts, and a highly advanced propulsion system utilizing precisely machined 7-bladed screw propellers. During simulated combat exercises, American submarine crews trained against recorded Akula acoustic signatures reported a terrifying reality. Their effective engagement envelopes were significantly smaller than those they enjoyed against older Victor III vessels. The Soviet Union had successfully closed the historical acoustic gap, transforming an overwhelming Western advantage into a highly competitive and dangerous underwater stalemate. Proving the enduring effectiveness of this design, several modernized Akula-class attack submarines continue to operate as formidable frontline assets within the Russian Navy today. While nuclear giants grabbed headlines, a quiet conventional predator became one of the most successful submarine designs in naval history. Project 877 and 636, known to NATO as the Kilo-class, has seen over 50 hulls, constructed for the Soviet and Russian navies since 1982, alongside extensive international exports. The Kilo earned its legendary Western nickname, the Black Hole, due to an incredibly low passive acoustic signature that made it the quietest diesel-electric submarine in active service upon its introduction. Decades after its Cold War debut, the class proved its lethal adaptability in modern warfare. In 2022, Russian Navy Kilo-class submarines stationed in the Black Sea launched high-precision caliber cruise missiles at land targets across Ukraine. This marked the historic first combat use of submarine-launched cruise missiles within the Black Sea theatre, demonstrating how a 1982-era hull had transitioned into a long-range, strategic strike platform. The remarkable longevity and commercial success of the Kilo-class deliver a profound lesson in naval engineering. A sound, reliable, fundamental design, subjected to continuous technological improvement, is operationally far more valuable than radical, temperamental concepts that cannot be easily maintained or mass-produced. In December 1983, the Soviet Navy commissioned a vessel designed to rule the ultimate depths of the ocean, K-278 Komsomolets, the sole member of the Project 685 Mike-class. Constructed with a specialized titanium hull, it became the deepest diving combat submarine in human history, capable of descending well below 1,000 meters. At this extreme depth, the Komsomolets was completely invulnerable, operating safely beyond the crush depth of every torpedo in the American inventory, far below conventional depth charges, and beneath the thermal layers where Western anti-submarine sensors could maintain consistent contact. Yet, this underwater fortress possessed a fatal vulnerability within. On April 7, 1989, while patrolling the Norwegian Sea, a catastrophic electrical fire erupted in the submarine's 7th compartment. The blaze spread uncontrollably, and at 17:08, the pride of the Soviet Deep Fleet foundered and sank, claiming the lives of 42 crew members. Today, the wreck of the Komsomolets lies resting at a depth of 1,686 meters. Trapped within her flooded torpedo tubes are 2 nuclear-armed torpedoes. The deepest diving submarine ever built remains an inaccessible, unrecoverable, and permanent radioactive contamination source, resting silently on the ocean floor. The Imperial Russian Navy laid them down between 1913 and 1916. Revolution prevented completion. 3 Svetlana-class light cruiser hulls sat immobile on their slipways through civil war, foreign intervention, and Bolshevik consolidation. Soviet engineers inherited hulls designed for a state that no longer existed. Chervona Ukraina, commissioned in 1927. Krasny Krim and Profintern followed in 1928. Standard displacement, approximately 7,600 tons. Length, 169 meters. Maximum speed, 29 knots. Armament settled at 15 130mm guns across 7 mounts. Formidable broadside, catastrophically weak anti-aircraft coverage, fire control dated to Imperial specifications, patched rather than replaced. Crew complement, 852. All 3 deployed to the Black Sea Fleet, where restricted geography partly masked their limitations. German air power in 1941 exposed them completely. Chervona Ukraina was struck by Heinkel, her 111 bombers at Sevastopol on November 13, 1941, capsizing within hours. Profintern, renamed Komintern in 1930, survived by conversion to a transport hulk before the air threat fully materialized. Krasny Krim earned the Guard's designation through 49 combat operations. 3 inherited hulls, 3 different outcomes, all confirming that a navy cannot be built retroactively from another state's strategic ambitions. The lesson cost 1 of 3 ships and informed every Soviet cruiser design that followed. She was laid down in 1913 under the Imperial Navy's Admiral Nakhimov program, intended to carry 356mm guns in a cruiser hull. That program died with the Tsar. Soviet authorities acquired the hull in 1926 and tasked the Central Design Bureau with completing it under radically different specifications. Standard displacement reached 8,030 tons. Length, 169.5 meters. 4 180mm guns in twin turrets replaced the original artillery scheme entirely. Maximum speed, 29.5 knots on trials. Her 16 100mm anti-aircraft guns represented a deliberate improvement over the Svetlana conversions, still insufficient for 1941 conditions. The twin 180mm turrets introduced Soviet engineers to the mechanical demands of heavy-caliber cruiser armament. Reliability proved problematic throughout her service life, with guns requiring extraordinary maintenance intervals and delivering inconsistent accuracy under operational stress. During the Black Sea campaign of 1941 through 1942, Krasny Kavkaz participated in the defense of Odessa and Kerch amphibious operations. A German bomb struck her in January 1942. She survived, earned the Guard's designation, and was stricken in 1947. She served as a target ship before being scrapped in 1952. Her 180mm twin turret configuration directly informed the Project 26 design philosophy, demonstrating what was mechanically achievable and precisely where the limits lay. 2 ships, 1 fundamental compromise. Kirov and Voroshilov were the Soviet Navy's first purpose-built cruisers, and they were Italian in everything except their flags. In 1932, Soviet authorities purchased design assistance from Ansaldo of Genoa, deriving Project 26 from the Raimondo Montecuccoli light cruiser baseline. Soviet engineers modified the superstructure and armament arrangement, but Ansaldo's lineage remained unmistakable. Kirov commissioned in September 1938. Voroshilov followed in June 1940. Standard displacement, 9,436 tons. Length, 191.3 meters. 9 180mm/57 guns in 3 triple turrets. Maximum range, 37,800 meters. Trial speed, 35.9 knots. Exceptional for her displacement. Anti-aircraft defense, 6 100mm guns. Theoretically adequate, operationally insufficient. Kirov survived the siege of Leningrad, operating from Kronstadt throughout the 900-day blockade and providing artillery support to Soviet ground forces. She absorbed multiple bomb strikes and a mine detonation without sinking. The triple 180mm turrets experienced persistent mechanical failures throughout both ships' careers, a predictable consequence of packing maximum caliber into minimum weight mountings. Voroshilov served in the Black Sea Fleet without catastrophic damage. Both were stricken in the late 1950s, replaced by the Sverdlov-class. Project 26 demonstrated the cost of building from borrowed templates, acceptable performance, acceptable cost, and no organic capacity to exceed the baseline the Italians had already established. More of the same, meaningfully better. Project Hung 26 bis was the Soviet Navy's incremental refinement of Project 26, same Ansaldo-derived hull, same triple 180mm turret arrangement, genuine improvements in fire control and secondary battery. 4 ships completed: Maxim Gorky in 1940, Molotov in 1941, Kaganovich in 1943, and Kalinin in 1944. Standard displacement 9,728 tons. Length 191.3 meters. 9 180mm/57 guns in 3 triple turrets, unchanged from Project 26. Anti-aircraft battery expanded to 8 100mm guns in twin mountings, a direct response to Spanish Civil War documentation by Soviet advisors observing air attacks against surface ships. Improved fire control for the anti-aircraft battery was fitted as standard. Maxim Gorky was mined in the Gulf of Finland on June 23, 1941, 2 days into the German invasion, losing her bow forward of the first turret. Soviet shipyards fitted a temporary bow within weeks and returned her to action. Molotov was torpedoed by an Italian MAS boat in the Black Sea in August 1942, losing her stern. She was repaired and returned to service. No Project 26 bis ship was lost to enemy action. All 4 were stricken between 1956 and 1959 as the Sverdlov-class entered service. Their combat record was not one of decisive engagement, it was one of institutional durability. In a war of attrition fought on Soviet terms, surviving was the first prerequisite for everything else. Planned before the war, delayed by it, completed a decade late. The Project 68 K Chapayev-class cruisers were laid down between 1939 and 1941. 5 ships, designed around a substantial increase in firepower over Project 26B's. German invasion halted construction entirely. Work resumed after 1945, using degraded materials and a depleted workforce. 5 ships commissioned: Chapayev, Zheleznyakov, Koibyshev, Frunze, and Ordzhonikidze, the last entering service in 1950. Standard displacement 11,300 tons. Length 201.9 meters. 12 152mm guns in 4 triple turrets. 8 100mm anti-aircraft guns in twin mountings. Maximum speed 33 knots. The shift from 180mm to 152mm caliber was a deliberate doctrinal decision, sacrificing shell weight for rate of fire and mechanical reliability. Soviet engineers had concluded that 180mm triple turrets were operationally unsustainable. The 152mm triple turret derived from land artillery programs proved significantly more dependable under service conditions. None of the 5 ships were tested in combat. Commissioned into the post-war Navy, they served as fleet training and prestige vessels. By the mid-1950s, Soviet naval doctrine was pivoting toward missile-armed combatants. The Chapayev-class was obsolete before the decade ended. All 5 were stricken between 1959 and 1965, ships built for a war already concluded, commissioned into an era that had already moved past them. The largest class of conventional cruisers completed by any nation after 1945, 14 ships commissioned between 1952 and 1955. 10 additional hulls were cancelled on their slipways after Stalin's death in 1953. Khrushchev, dismissive of surface warships, terminated the program without ceremony. Standard displacement 13,600 tons. Length 210 meters. 4 triple 152mm turrets, 12 guns, maximum range 30,500 meters. 12 100mm anti-aircraft guns in 6 twin mountings. Maximum speed 32.7 knots. Twin-shaft steam turbines producing 110,000 shaft horsepower. The Sverdlov's appearance at Britain's 1953 Spithead Coronation Review alarmed Western naval analysts, a modern, capable cruiser where they had expected nothing. 3 notable conversions define the class's legacy. Dzerzhinsky was rebuilt in 1961 to carry a twin SAN-2 surface-to-air missile launcher in place of her rear 152mm turret, the Soviet Navy's first guided missile cruiser experiment. The system proved operationally marginal. The conversion was not repeated. Admiral Senyavin and Zhdanov were rebuilt as command cruisers under Project 68U in the early 1970s. The surviving fleet was stricken progressively from the late 1980s through 1993. The Sverdlov-class was the Soviet Union's last commitment to conventional gun cruiser doctrine, ships that represented strategic tradition at the precise moment strategic doctrine was being rewritten around the missile. They were not obsolete when they commissioned. They became so before their crews had time to grow old. Stalin wanted battleships. The Soviet Navy attempted battlecruisers. Project 82, the Stalingrad class, was the most ambitious Soviet surface warship program of the post-war decade and the most costly failure. 3 hulls were laid down. Stalingrad at Nikolaev in 1951, Moskva at Molotovsk in 1952, and a 3rd hull designated Arkhangelsk at the same yard shortly after. Standard displacement 36,500 tons, length 273.6 meters, 9 305mm guns in 3 triple turrets, the heaviest gun battery on any Soviet warship, 12 130mm secondary guns in twin mountings, 24 45mm anti-aircraft guns, design speed 33.5 knots. The design philosophy was a direct reversion to pre-missile heavy gun doctrine, the precise doctrine Western navies were simultaneously and publicly abandoning. Stalin's death on March 5, 1953, ended the program within weeks. Khrushchev ordered all 3 hulls scrapped on their slipways. No ship of the class was ever launched. The decision was simultaneously correct and institutionally brutal. Correct because the 305mm cruiser had no plausible role in the emerging missile age. Brutal because approximately 48,000 tons of completed structural steel was destroyed without ever floating. Project 82 stands as the Soviet Navy's most expensive cancellation and its most instructive demonstration of what happens when shipbuilding doctrine lags the strategic environment by a full generation. The gun cruiser died. The missile cruiser was born. Project 58 was the Soviet Union's first purpose-built guided missile cruiser, a design so focused on anti-ship missile delivery that every other system was subordinated to it. 4 ships entered service. Grozny in 1962, Admiral Fokin in 1963, Admiral Golovko in 1964, and Varyag in 1965. Standard displacement 5,600 tons. Length 142.3 meters. Primary armament 8 P-35. Progress anti-ship missiles in 4 twin launchers, with 8 reloads stowed within the launchers themselves. The P-35 delivered a maximum range of 460 kilometers at Mach 1.3, carrying a 1,000-kilogram warhead, nuclear or conventional. One SAN-1 Goa twin rail launcher provided air defense. Two twin 76.2 mm guns covered close-range threats, maximum speed 34.5 knots. The Kinda-class embodied a fundamental doctrinal shift. Soviet surface combatants were no longer gun platforms, they were missile carriers. The trade-off was significant. At sea, P-35 launcher reloads were operationally impossible, meaning each ship had effectively one engagement per sortie, 16 missiles against an American carrier battle group. The Soviet naval staff understood the inadequacy. The Kinda-class was simultaneously a genuine capability leap and a demonstration of the resource constraints that would force Soviet designers to revisit the same structural problems repeatedly. All four ships were decommissioned by 1994, replaced by systems that addressed, but never fully solved, the reload problem they could not. The Soviet Navy needed to kill ballistic missile submarines, specifically American Polaris boats, capable of striking Soviet cities from positions Soviet forces could not reliably locate. Project 1123 was the institutional answer, anti-submarine helicopter carriers classified as cruisers because Soviet doctrine had no other category. Two ships completed, Moskva in 1967 and Leningrad in 1969, standard displacement 14,500 tons, length 189.9 meters. The forward hull carried a conventional cruiser armament, one twin SAN-3 Goblet SAM launcher, two twin 57mm guns, and an RPK, one Vika anti-submarine rocket system. The rear two-thirds of the ship was a flight deck accommodating 14 Ka-25 Hormone anti-submarine helicopters. Maximum speed 29 knots. The K-25 deployed sonobuoys, dipping sonar, and ASW torpedoes, providing theoretical hunter-killer capability against Polaris submarines in the Mediterranean. In practice, the design failed at its conceptual foundation. The flight deck was too small for sustained operations in North Atlantic Sea states. 14 helicopters were insufficient to prosecute a competent adversary submarine before it relocated. A planned third ship was cancelled before her keel was laid. Both Moskva and Leningrad remained in service until the early 1990s as training vessels. The class proved what it was designed to disprove. No cruiser-sized hull could carry enough helicopters to solve a strategic-scale submarine detection problem. The Soviet Navy paid the tuition fee twice before building the Kirov-class carriers that followed. 4 ships, 3 roles attempted, 1 coherent mission never achieved. Project 1134 was designed as a Kinda successor, a larger, more capable anti-ship missile cruiser. By the time the first ship entered service, Soviet naval doctrine had shifted decisively toward anti-submarine warfare. The Kresta I class existed in the gap between two doctrines. Ships, Vladivostok in 1967, Vice-Admiral Drozd in 1968, Sevastopol and Admiral Zuzulia, both in 1969. Standard displacement, 7,600 tons. Length, 158.4 meters. Maximum speed, 33.5 knots. Primary armament, 4 P-35 anti-ship missile launchers, reduced from the Kinda's 8 to accommodate improved air defense. 2 twin SAN-1 Goa launchers replaced the single Kinda system. 2 twin 57mm guns. Anti-submarine capability was added through two 12-barrel RBU 6000 rocket launchers and two quintuple torpedo tubes, adequate in isolation, not optimized in context. The result was a ship that could execute several functions and master none. Anti-ship performance was inferior to the Kinder-class. ASW performance was inferior to what would follow. The design ran to exactly 4 hulls before the Kresta II superseded it. All 4 were decommissioned by the late 1990s. Project 1134 is best understood as the ship that forced Soviet designers to make a doctrinal choice they had been deferring for a decade, and the choice, definitively, was anti-submarine warfare above all else. The choice was made: anti-submarine warfare exclusively. Project 1134A discarded the Kresta I's anti-ship missile battery entirely, rebuilding the design around the SS-N-14 Silex ASW missile, capable of delivering a nuclear depth charge or homing torpedo to a contact at 50 kilometers range. 10 ships completed between 1969 and 1977. Admiral Izakov, Admiral Nakimov, Admiral Makarov, Marshal Voroshilov, Admiral Oktyabrski, Admiral Izachenkov, Marshal Timoshenko, Vasily Chapayev, Admiral Yumashev, and Marshal Shaposhnikov. Standard displacement 7,700 tons, length 159 meters, maximum speed 34 knots. SS-N-14 occupied 2 quadruple mounts where the P-35 launchers had been. 2 twin SAN-3 Goblet launchers handled area air defense. A Kal-25 helicopter extended the sonar search perimeter. Bow-mounted MG-332 Titan II sonar and a variable depth system provided the detection baseline. The Kresta II represented genuine doctrinal commitment: 10 hulls optimized for one primary mission. Whether that mission was fully achievable was a separate question. Soviet ASW tactics were built on mass saturation rather than precision, an acknowledgement of sensor limitations rather than confidence in terminal accuracy. All 10 were decommissioned between 1991 and 2003. They served long enough to confirm the underlying strategic anxiety. Detecting a Polaris submarine in open ocean before it launched was never a solved problem. 10 Kresta IIs did not solve it. Bigger, faster, still constrained by the same unresolved detection problem. Project 1134B was the Soviet Navy's final conventionally powered anti-submarine cruiser, an enlarged Kresta II with gas turbine propulsion and an extensively upgraded weapons suite. 7 ships completed between 1973 and 1980: Nikolaev, Ochakov, Kerch, Azov, Petropavlovsk, Tashkent, and Tallinn. Standard displacement 9,900 tons. Length 173.4 meters. Maximum speed 32 knots. The shift from steam to combined gas turbine propulsion was operationally significant. Cold start time dropped from hours to minutes, enabling rapid response from harbour standby. Armament SS-N-14 in 2 quadruple mounts, twin SA-N-3 Goblet, SA-N-4, Gecko in retractable twin launchers, 2 Ka-25 helicopters, and RPK-2 Vyuga rockets for short-range engagements. The Azov received a critical modification in 1977, her aft SAN-3 mount, replaced by a prototype SAN-6 Grumble vertical launch system directly anticipating the Slava-class weapons suite. The test was successful. The Kirov-class represented the Soviet Navy's mature, conventional ASW cruiser. and simultaneously the endpoint of a decade-long design progression that had never fully resolved its fundamental limitation. All 7 were decommissioned by 2008. Their service careers were professionally unremarkable: no combat, no decisive engagements, and the same unresolved open ocean detection problem that had defined Soviet ASW doctrine since the Kinder-class first left Leningrad harbor in 1962. Nothing in the Western Fleet compared. The project, 1144 Orlan-class, designated heavy nuclear missile cruisers, was the Soviet Navy's most capable and most expensive surface combatant program. 4 ships commissioned: Kirov in 1980, renamed Admiral Ushakov in 1992, Frunze in 1984, later Admiral Lazarev, Kalinin in 1988, later Admiral Nakhimov, Yuri Andropov in 1998, renamed Pyotr Veliky. Standard displacement 24,300 tons, length 252 meters. Nuclear plus oil-fired steam propulsion, 140,000 shaft horsepower on 2 shafts, maximum speed 32 knots. The weapons suite was without parallel. 20 P-700 Granite anti-ship cruise missiles in below-deck vertical launchers, range 625 kilometers at Mach 2.5, nuclear or conventional warhead. 12 SAN-6 Grumble vertical launch SAM cells, 16 SAN, 9 Gauntlet point defense rounds, 3 twin 130mm guns, 10 torpedo tubes, 2 Ka-27 helicopters. 3 of the 4 ships became inactive by the mid-1990s as reactor maintenance funding collapsed following Soviet dissolution. Pyotr Veliky alone remained operational as Northern Fleet flagship. Admiral Nakhimov entered prolonged modernization in 2013, still incomplete as of late 2024, a program that had itself become a demonstration of the same institutional dysfunction that cancelled Project 82 in 1953. The Kirov-class embodied the Soviet Navy's maximum ambition, designed to challenge American carrier battle groups in open ocean combat, funded until the state that built them ceased to exist. 3 ships commissioned, 1 sunk in combat, 1 rusting incomplete in a Ukrainian harbour, 1 still operational. The Project 1164 Atlant-class, NATO designation Slava, was designed as a conventionally powered complement to the nuclear Kirov-class. 4 hulls ordered, 3 entered service. Slava commissioned in 1982, renamed Moskva in 1995, Marshal Ustinov in 1986, Varyag in 1989. Ukraina, the 4th hull, was transferred incomplete to Ukraine at Soviet dissolution and remained in Mykolaiv harbour as an unmaintained hulk through 2024. Standard displacement 11,490 tons. Length 186.4 meters. Maximum speed 32 knots. 16 P-1000 Vulcan anti-ship cruise missiles in 8 twin launchers arranged along the hull's flanks. The most immediately recognizable feature of the class and the most visible expression of Soviet anti-carrier doctrine. 8 SAN-6 Grumble vertical launch SAM cells provided area air defense. 2 twin 130mm guns. Moskva served as Black Sea Fleet flagship for 23 years. On April 13, 2022, 2 Ukrainian R-360 Neptune anti-ship missiles struck her amidships. She sank the following day, the largest warship lost in combat since the Argentine Belgrano in 1982. The loss confirmed what strategic analysts had long theorized. Soviet-era cruiser designs optimized for open-ocean anti-carrier warfare carried no reliable defense against coordinated subsonic missile attack at short range. The Slava-class did not end Soviet cruiser doctrine. The sinking of Moskva did.